you think you can disobey me?
Every mother of a soldier prays for one thing, that her son comes home safe. But for 85-year-old Josephine, her son Kenneth's return would not be the end of her nightmare. It would be the moment he finally discovered the truth, that for months, the home she had lived in her entire life had been turned into a prison, and that the cruel warden torturing his own mother and his innocent young daughter was the beautiful, loving woman he had married just before he left. Kenneth thought his biggest battles would be fought on foreign soil, in deserts of sand and rock, under a sun that burned without mercy. He was a soldier, a man trained to face down the enemy, to protect the innocent, and to understand the clear lines between right and wrong. He believed he knew what danger looked like. He was wrong. His most brutal war was not waiting for him thousands of miles away. It was about to unfold in the one place he considered a home. It was going to happen inside his own home. And the enemy wasn't a stranger in a uniform. The enemy was someone he loved, someone he trusted with his entire world, someone who was about to prove that the deepest wounds are not caused by bullets, but by betrayal. This is a story about a family forged in fire and loss, a family that had already endured more pain than most could ever imagine. It is the story of a mother's unending love, a son's devotion, and a granddaughter's innocent heart. They had built a small, fragile world of safety for themselves, a fortress made of love and shared memories. They thought they were unbreakable. But they never knew that the greatest danger to their family was not on a battlefield overseas. It was already walking through their front door, wearing a beautiful smile and speaking with a gentle voice, a danger he had invited in himself. To understand the tragedy that was to come, you must first understand the love that was almost destroyed. You must meet Josephine, Kenneth's mother. At 85 years old, Josephine was the anchor of their family. Her hands, though wrinkled and spotted with age, were the same hands that had held Kenneth as a baby, the same hands that had wiped his tears, and the same hands that now braided her granddaughter Zoe's hair every morning. Her face was a roadmap of her life, etched with lines of laughter, but also with the deep, permanent creases of a sorrow that never truly faded. Decades ago, Josephine had a full house, a loving husband, 3 beautiful children, and a life filled with the ordinary, chaotic joy of a growing family. Kenneth was her youngest. One afternoon, she and Kenneth, just a boy at the time, went out for groceries. It was a simple trip, an errand they had done 100 times before, but on that day, everything changed. While they were gone, a fire, cruel and swift, tore through their home. It took everything. Her husband and her 3 other children were gone in an instant. They were lost to the smoke and the flames, leaving behind a silence that would echo in Josephine's heart for the rest of her life. From that day forward, Josephine's world shrank until it contained only one person, Kenneth. He was not just her son. He was her reason for breathing. He was the living memory of the family she had lost. She poured every ounce of her love, her strength, and her hope into him. She never remarried. No man could ever replace the husband she had lost, and no one, she felt, could ever understand the sacred duty she had to protect the one child she had left. She raised Kenneth by herself, working 2 jobs, never complaining, her entire existence dedicated to ensuring he had a future. She taught him to be strong, to be kind, and to be a protector, perhaps because she felt the world had failed to protect the rest of her family. Kenneth grew up under the weight of this love and this loss. He was a good boy, a good son. He saw the quiet sadness in his mother's eyes, even when she smiled. He knew he was her whole world, and he carried that responsibility with a maturity far beyond his years. From a young age, he felt a pull towards the military. It wasn't about glory or adventure. For Kenneth, it was about purpose. The fire had left him with a deep, unspoken feeling of helplessness. He couldn't save his father or his siblings. As a soldier, he felt he could save someone. He could stand between danger and innocent people. He could become the protector his family never had on that terrible day. When he told Josephine of his plans, her heart seized with fear. The world had already taken so much from her. The thought of it taking her last, most precious gift was more than she could bear. "No, Kenneth," she had pleaded, her voice trembling. "You are all I have. The world is a dangerous place. Please, stay here. Stay safe." He held her hands, the same hands that had raised him, and looked into her worried eyes. "I have to do this, Mom," he said gently. "It's who I am, but I promise you, I will always be safe. I will always come home to you." It was a promise he intended to keep, a promise that became his mantra on every mission, in every corner of the world he was sent to. Before he left for basic training, life threw another unexpected turn his way. His girlfriend at the time, a woman he had thought he might build a life with, became pregnant. Their relationship was already strained, and the news of a child pushed it to its breaking point. A year after their daughter Zoe was born, the woman made a decision that would shape their lives forever. She packed a bag, bought a plane ticket, and left. She fled to another country, leaving behind a 1-year-old girl without a word, without a second glance. She simply vanished from their lives, leaving a wound in the heart of a child too young to understand it. But where one mother had abandoned her, another stepped in. Josephine, who had already raised her own son, did not hesitate. She opened her arms and her heart to this tiny motherless girl. Zoe became the light that filled the old, quiet corners of Josephine's heart. Together, Kenneth and Josephine created a world of love and security for Zoe. She grew into a bright, happy 6-year-old girl who knew nothing but the fierce, unwavering love of her father and her grandmother. For Zoe, Josephine was not just a grandmother. She was her mom, her caretaker, her storyteller, and her whole world when her father was away. The bond between the three of them was extraordinary. It was a triangle of love, each person holding the others up. Josephine lived for Kenneth and Zoe. Kenneth fought for his mother and his daughter, and Zoe, in her sweet innocence, was the sunshine that warmed both of their lives. When Kenneth was home on leave, their small house was filled with a joy that felt powerful enough to keep any darkness at bay. They would spend hours outside, Josephine teaching Zoe the names of the flowers, while Kenneth fixed the fence. They would cook together in the kitchen, Zoe standing on a stool, clumsily stirring a pot, while her father and grandmother laughed. These were the moments Kenneth lived for. These were the memories that sustained him when he was thousands of miles away, sleeping in a barracks, a photograph of his mother and daughter, his most prized possession. But as the time for his first major deployment drew near, a familiar fear began to creep back into Josephine's heart. She was getting older. She was 85, and she felt the fragility of her own life more keenly than ever. The thought of Kenneth being alone in the world, should something happen to her, was a torment. "You need a wife, Kenneth," she told him one evening, her voice serious. "You need to have a family of your own. I don't want you to be alone. I don't want you to die without a family." He understood her fear. It was the same fear that had haunted her for decades. He was a soldier. He faced death. And he knew that the greatest peace he could give his mother was the knowledge that he would not be alone. It was then that he met Ivy. To Kenneth, Ivy was like a dream. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with a radiant smile and eyes that seemed to hold a universe of kindness. She came from a good family, she was intelligent, and she was charming. When he introduced her to his mother, even Josephine was won over. She saw in Ivy a woman who could love her son, a woman who could be a mother to Zoe, a woman who could complete their family. Josephine gave her blessing, and in that moment, Kenneth felt a profound sense of relief and happiness. He was deeply, completely in love. He believed he had found the final piece of the puzzle, the person who would stand beside him and help care for the two most important people in his life. He saw a future filled with happiness, a home filled with love, and a family that was finally whole and secure. He was a man who planned for every contingency on the battlefield, who anticipated every threat, who saw every possible ambush. He was a soldier, trained to see what others could not. But love, as he was about to learn, can be blinding. He was so captivated by the beautiful image Ivy presented to the world that he failed to see the darkness hiding just beneath the surface. He was so in love with the woman he thought she was that he never for a moment suspected the woman she truly was. He believed he was bringing a guardian angel into his family's life. In reality, he had just unlocked the gates and invited a monster to come inside, and this monster would not stop until it had tried to burn his entire world to the ground. Ivy entered their lives like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. Kenneth had met her through a mutual friend from his hometown, and from their very first date, he was completely captivated. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably stunning. It was the way she listened, the way her eyes seemed to lock onto his as if he were the only person in the world. She asked about his life in the military, not with the usual casual curiosity, but with a deep, seemingly genuine interest. She spoke of duty and honor in a way that made him feel seen and understood. More importantly, she asked about his family. When Kenneth spoke of his mother, Josephine, and his daughter, Zoe, he watched Ivy's face for any sign of hesitation. Many women were intimidated by the idea of a ready-made family, especially one with an elderly matriarch at its center. But Ivy showed no fear. Instead, her expression softened. She told him how much she admired a man who was so devoted to his family. She said it was the truest sign of a good heart. When Kenneth finally brought Ivy home to meet them, she was the picture of perfection. She didn't arrive empty-handed. She brought a beautiful orchid for Josephine, remembering a passing comment Kenneth had made about his mother's love for flowers. For Zoe, she brought a large, beautifully illustrated book of fairy tales. She didn't push herself on the little girl. Instead, she sat on the floor, opened the book, and began to read in a soft, melodic voice. Zoe, who was often shy around strangers, found herself slowly inching closer, drawn in by the story and the gentle warmth Ivy projected. Josephine watched from her armchair, her old eyes missing nothing. She saw the way Ivy smiled at her son, a smile that seemed to light up the room. She saw the patient way she treated her granddaughter. She saw a woman who was respectful, poised, and kind. Over the next few weeks, Ivy became a regular visitor. She would sit with Josephine for hours, listening to her stories about the old days, about the family she had lost, about raising Kenneth on her own. She never seemed bored. She would nod, ask questions, and pat Josephine's hand with a look of deep empathy. For Kenneth, watching this was like watching a dream unfold. He had worried so much about finding someone who would fit into their small, tightly knit world. And here was Ivy, fitting in so perfectly, it felt like she had been destined to be there all along. He saw his mother smiling more than she had in years. He saw his daughter beginning to look at Ivy with a hopeful affection, the cautious question of, "Could you be my new mommy?" dancing in her eyes. The guilt he carried with him on every deployment, the gnawing worry about leaving his mother and daughter alone, began to ease. Ivy felt like the answer to a prayer he hadn't even known how to speak. Their courtship was a whirlwind of happiness. When he proposed a few months later, there was no question about the answer. The wedding was planned quickly. Kenneth's next deployment was looming, and they both wanted to be married before he left. Josephine was overjoyed. She helped Ivy with the wedding plans, sharing stories of her own wedding day so many years ago. It felt, for a fleeting moment, like the daughter she had lost in the fire had come back to her. They were a family, growing and healing. But amidst all this joy, a small, foolish thought entered Kenneth's mind. It was born from a place of insecurity and a clumsy desire to manage everyone's feelings. His mother, in her protective way, had once said, "Just make sure you really know her, son. Take your time." It was simple, motherly advice, but Kenneth's mind twisted it. He worried Ivy might feel rushed by the upcoming deployment. He worried she might feel pressured, and so a lie, a small and seemingly harmless one, began to form. He considered telling Ivy that his mother had insisted they date for a few more months before getting married, just to be sure. He thought it might make him seem more thoughtful, more considerate of Ivy's feelings, by showing that he was willing to wait for her, even against his mother's supposed wishes. He imagined it as a romantic gesture, a way of saying, "You are more important to me than any timeline." But as soon as the thought formed, he dismissed it. It was a stupid, childish idea. Why would he ever invent a problem where none existed? He loved Ivy, she loved him, his mother approved. Everything was perfect. He pushed the thought from his mind, forgetting it as quickly as it had come. The wedding day was beautiful. Josephine cried tears of joy as she watched her son, so handsome in his dress uniform, stand at the altar. Zoe was the flower girl, looking like a tiny princess in her white dress, and she beamed as she walked down the aisle. Ivy was a vision. When Kenneth saw her, he felt his breath catch in his throat. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. He made his vows with a heart full of love and a future that seemed limitless. They left for their honeymoon the next day, a short trip to a quiet beach resort before he had to report back to base. The first few days were idyllic. They walked on the sand, swam in the ocean, and talked for hours, sharing dreams for the future. They planned the house they would buy, the children they might have, the life they would build together. Kenneth felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He was a husband. He had a wife. His family was secure. On their last night, they had a celebratory dinner. They drank expensive champagne, toasting to their future, to their love, to their family. They were both giddy with happiness and slightly drunk. Back in their room, with the sound of the ocean waves outside, they lay together, feeling closer than ever. It was in this moment of unguarded intimacy, his mind hazy from the alcohol and swimming with love, that Kenneth felt an overwhelming urge to be completely, utterly honest with his new wife. He wanted there to be no secrets between them, not even the smallest, most foolish ones. And so, he remembered the lie. The silly, childish thought he had dismissed weeks ago. He chuckled to himself. "You know," he began, his words slurring slightly, "I almost told you something really dumb before the wedding." Ivy turned to him, her eyes soft in the dim light. "What was it?" she asked, smiling. "Well," he said, feeling a strange pride in his own honesty, "I almost told you that my mom wanted us to wait a few more months to get married, just to get to know you better. I was going to pretend it was her idea, just to, I don't know, to show you I wasn't rushing you." He laughed, expecting her to laugh with him, to see the absurdity of it. But Ivy did not laugh. Her smile vanished. It didn't just fade, it was extinguished, as if a switch had been flipped. The warmth in her eyes turned to something cold and hard, like chips of ice. The change was so sudden, so total, that for a moment, Kenneth thought he had imagined it. The air in the room grew heavy and still. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Kenneth's drunken haze began to clear, replaced by a creeping sense of confusion and alarm. I just said I had a silly thought, that I almost told you my mom wanted us to wait, but I didn't. It wasn't true. She loves you. I was just being stupid." Ivy slowly sat up in bed, pulling the sheet around her like a shield. She stared at him, but it felt like she was looking straight through him. The woman he had been laughing with just moments before was gone, replaced by a stranger with a face carved from stone. "So," she said, her voice dripping with a venom he had never heard before, "your mother, your precious mother, she didn't think I was good enough for you. She wanted you to wait. She tried to stop our wedding." "No, Ivy, that's not what I said." Kenneth scrambled to explain, his heart starting to pound in his chest. "It was a lie I made up in my own head. I never said it. She never said it. She was so happy for us." But it was too late. He could see in her eyes that she wasn't listening. She had latched onto the words, "My mom wanted us to wait," and in her mind, this fiction had become an unshakable truth. A seed of pure, unadulterated hatred for Josephine had been planted, and in the fertile ground of that moment, it took root instantly. She believed that Josephine, the sweet, frail old woman who had welcomed her with open arms, had secretly tried to sabotage their love. She saw a manipulator, a rival for her husband's affection. The rest of the night passed in a thick, suffocating silence. The next morning, the change in Ivy was even more pronounced. She was polite, but her politeness was a cold, sharp-edged weapon. There was no warmth, no affection. When Kenneth tried to touch her, she flinched. He spent the entire morning desperately trying to undo the damage, explaining over and over that he was drunk, that it was a stupid, untrue thought he'd had, that his mother adored her. Finally, after hours of his frantic apologies, Ivy turned to him. She forced a smile onto her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Okay, Kenneth," she said, her voice smooth and even. "I believe you. You were drunk. It's forgotten." And Kenneth, desperate to believe her, chose to see her words as the truth. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. He thought the crisis was over. He thought they could move on. He hugged her, and she allowed him to, her body remaining stiff in his arms. He didn't see the look in her eyes as she stared over his shoulder. It was a look of cold, calculating fury. She had pretended to believe him, but she would never forget. She would never forgive. The lie Kenneth had invented and never even told had become her truth, and she was going to make Josephine pay for it. The war had not started with a bomb or a gunshot. It had started with a drunken, foolish confession in a honeymoon suite, and Josephine and little Zoe, innocent and unaware, were about to become its first casualties. The day Kenneth left was filled with the quiet sorrow that always accompanied his departures. He stood in the driveway, his uniform crisp, his bag packed and ready by the door. Little Zoe clung to his leg, her face buried in the coarse fabric of his pants, refusing to let go. He knelt down, his large, strong hands gently cupping her face. "Hey, my little warrior," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You be a good girl for Grandma and for Ivy, okay? I'll be home before you know it." Zoe could only nod, her lower lip trembling as she fought back tears. Next, he turned to his mother. Josephine stood straight and proud, the way she always did when he was leaving. It was her own silent act of strength, her way of showing him that she would be fine, that he didn't have to worry. But he saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had lived there since the day the fire took the rest of their family. He wrapped her in a hug, feeling how frail she had become. "I love you, Mom," he whispered into her hair. "You take care of yourself. Ivy's here to help with everything." Josephine squeezed him tightly. "You just come home safe, son. That's all that matters. Come home." Finally, he turned to Ivy, his beautiful new wife. She looked at him with what he saw as pure, unadulterated love. She gently took his hand. "Don't you worry about a thing," she said, her voice like honey. "I'll take care of our family. I'll move in with them while you're gone. It'll be easier than going back and forth, and I don't want to be alone in our big house anyway. I'll make sure they have everything they need. They are my family now, too." Kenneth's heart swelled with gratitude. He felt like the luckiest man alive. He had found a woman who not only loved him, but loved the people who mattered most to him. He pulled her into a long, deep kiss. A final goodbye filled with promises of a happy future. He got in his car, gave one last wave to the three of them standing on the porch, a perfect picture of a loving family. As he drove away, he looked in his rearview mirror and saw Ivy with one arm around his mother's shoulders and the other resting on his daughter's head. A perfect protector. A perfect wife. He smiled, his mind at ease, completely unaware that he was not driving away from danger, but leaving his entire world in its clutches. The moment Kenneth's car disappeared around the corner, the warmth in Ivy's touch vanished. The arm she had around Josephine's shoulder dropped away as if she had been touching something unpleasant. The hand on Zoe's head lifted. The gentle smile on her face dissolved, replaced by a cool, unreadable expression. Josephine felt the shift immediately. It was a sudden drop in temperature, a change in the very atmosphere around them. "Well," Ivy said, her voice no longer soft but brisk and businesslike. "Let's get inside. We have a lot to discuss." Josephine and Zoe followed her into the living room. The house, which had felt warm and full of love just moments before, now felt foreign and cold. Ivy didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room, her hands on her hips, looking around as if she were appraising a piece of property she had just acquired. "First things first," Ivy announced. "I'll be moving my things into the spare bedroom this afternoon. From now on, I'll be handling all the household affairs. That includes the money Kenneth sends. It will be easier if it all goes through me, so I can manage the budget properly." Josephine was taken aback. "Ivy, dear, that's very kind of you, but it's not necessary. We are perfectly fine on our own. We have our routines." Ivy turned her head slowly to look at Josephine. There was no kindness in her eyes now. There was only a flat, cold authority. "Kenneth asked me to take care of things, Josephine, and that's what I'm going to do. The old routines are over. We'll be starting some new ones. My ones." That afternoon, Ivy returned with 2 large suitcases. She didn't just bring clothes. She brought her own bed linens, her own towels, even her own set of kitchen knives. She moved through the house with a sense of ownership, replacing Josephine's things with her own. It was not the act of a helpful guest. It was the act of an occupying force. The first rule was established that evening. Visitors were no longer welcome. 2 days later, Susan, Josephine's neighbor and friend of 20 years, came knocking on the door, holding a plate covered in foil. It was Tuesday, and for as long as they had been neighbors, Susan brought Josephine a slice of her freshly baked lemon cake every Tuesday. It was their small ritual. Before Josephine could get up to answer the door, Ivy was already there, opening it just a crack. "Susan, how lovely to see you. Ivy said, her voice once again dripping with manufactured sweetness. Through the crack, Susan could see Josephine in her chair, a hopeful look on her face. "Hi, Ivy. I just brought Josephine her cake," Susan said cheerfully. "How are you all settling in?" "Oh, we're managing," Ivy sighed, putting on a performance of a burdened caretaker. "But I'm afraid Josephine isn't up for visitors today. She's been very tired, and the doctor says she needs absolute quiet. I'm trying to keep the house as calm as possible for her. It's for her own good, you understand." Susan's face fell with disappointment and concern. "Oh, the poor dear, of course. Well, please give her my love, and here, you all enjoy the cake." "That's so thoughtful of you," Ivy said, taking the plate. "I'll make sure she gets it when she's feeling better." Ivy closed the door, locked it, and walked into the kitchen. Josephine watched as Ivy scraped the entire slice of cake into the trash can. She then turned to Josephine, a thin, cruel smile on her lips. "No more visitors," she stated simply. "They are a distraction, and they bring germs." Ivy had begun her campaign not with a shout, but with a whisper. She started by cutting them off from the world, building the walls of their prison one sweet-sounding lie at a time. It was a violation of the most basic human need: connection. She was isolating her prey. If you think what Ivy did was wrong, comment, "Everyone deserves respect" below to show where you stand. The days that followed were a slow, suffocating descent into a new reality. Ivy controlled everything. She decided what they ate, when they ate, and if they ate. She took Josephine's phone, placing the landline in her own room, and claiming it was so Josephine wouldn't be disturbed by wrong numbers. In truth, it was to sever her last link to the outside world. Josephine, though old, was not a weak woman. She had survived the loss of her entire family. She had raised a son on her own. She would not be tyrannized in her own home. One evening, after being served a pitifully small portion of soup for dinner, she decided to confront Ivy. "This has to stop, Ivy," Josephine said, her voice steady but firm. "This is not what Kenneth would want. He would be horrified if he knew how you were treating us." Ivy slowly put down her spoon and looked at Josephine with an expression of mock pity. "Oh, Josephine," she said, her voice soft and condescending. "You really don't know your son at all, do you? You sit here in your little house thinking you're the center of his world, but he has a new world now, me." "What are you talking about?" Josephine asked, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "He told me everything, Josephine," Ivy continued, leaning forward as if sharing a secret. "He told me about your little talk before the wedding. He told me how you didn't think I was good enough for him, how you wanted him to wait, to get to know me better, hoping he'd change his mind." Josephine stared at her, her mind reeling in confusion. "What? My son would never say such a thing. I was happy for you both." "Were you?" Ivy's eyes narrowed into slits. "Kenneth told me everything on our honeymoon. He confessed how you tried to stand in our way. And you know what else he did? He asked me to come here. He asked me to keep an eye on you. He was worried you would try to turn Zoe against me while he was gone. He trusted me to protect his family from you." The words struck Josephine with the force of a physical blow. It was a lie, a monstrous, twisted lie, but Ivy delivered it with such chilling conviction that for a terrifying moment, a sliver of doubt entered Josephine's heart. Could her son, her beloved Kenneth, have betrayed her so completely? The confusion and the pain were a powerful weapon, and Ivy wielded it with surgical precision. It disarmed Josephine, leaving her stunned and heartbroken. That was the turning point. That was the moment Josephine realized she was not dealing with a difficult daughter-in-law. She was dealing with something far more sinister. This wasn't about control or money. This was about hatred, a deep personal hatred aimed directly at her. From that day on, the cruelty escalated. It became a daily ritual of humiliation. The worst was the bathing. Josephine was old, and her daily bath was a simple comfort, a way to soothe her aching bones. Ivy took that away from her. "You don't need a bath today," Ivy would say dismissively. "You haven't done anything to get dirty. You just sit in that chair all day." One day turned into 2, and then 3. Josephine felt unclean, her dignity stripped away layer by layer. Zoe, seeing her grandmother's distress, tried to help. She would bring a warm washcloth, and they would try to clean up in secret. But Ivy always found out. Her punishment was always swift and cold. The first time Kenneth called, the house was filled with a tense, electric fear. The phone rang in Ivy's room, and they heard her answer, her voice instantly transforming into that of a sweet, loving wife. "Hi, honey. Oh, we miss you so much." A few minutes later, she appeared in the living room doorway, holding the cordless phone. Josephine and Zoe looked up, their hearts pounding. A lifeline, a chance to be saved. Ivy walked over and handed the phone to Josephine. As she did, she leaned in close, her breath cold against Josephine's ear. "Remember," she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss that only Josephine could hear. "He believes me, not you. If you say one wrong word, just one, I will tell him you're going senile. I will tell him you're making up stories to hurt me. And then, I will make sure you and the little brat don't eat for a week. Do you understand me?" She smiled brightly as she straightened up. Josephine's hand trembled as she took the phone. She looked at Zoe, who was watching with wide, terrified eyes. She couldn't risk it. She couldn't risk her granddaughter starving. She brought the phone to her ear. "Mom?" Kenneth's voice came through the line, warm and full of love, a voice from another world. "How are you? How's my little girl? Is Ivy taking good care of you?" Josephine closed her eyes, fighting back a sob that threatened to choke her. She took a deep breath, picturing her son's face. "We're fine, son," she said, her voice sounding thin and distant even to her own ears. "Everything is good. We're all good." She had just sealed their prison doors from the inside. The phone call ended, and the silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Josephine handed the phone back to Ivy, her hand trembling, her spirit feeling as though it had been hollowed out. Ivy took it with a triumphant smirk, the look of a general who had just won a decisive battle, the small flicker of hope that had ignited in Josephine's chest when she heard her son's voice was now extinguished, leaving behind only the cold ash of despair. She had been given a chance to cry for help, and she had been forced to say that everything was fine. For Zoe, the experience was a lesson in a kind of fear she had never known. She had seen the threat in Ivy's eyes. She had heard the venom in her whisper to her grandmother. She was only 6 years old, but she understood one thing with perfect chilling clarity. Ivy was the monster, but her father, their hero, couldn't see it. He thought the monster was an angel. How do you tell someone the sun is dark when all they can see is the light? The confusion and terror settled deep inside her, planting seeds of a sorrow too heavy for a child to carry. In the days that followed the phone call, Ivy's reign of cruelty intensified. It was as if their forced compliance had emboldened her, proving that she held all the power. The denial of baths became a regular punishment. Josephine would go for days feeling grimy and degraded. The simple act of being clean turned into a privilege that Ivy could grant or withhold at will. When she was finally allowed to wash, it was a hurried, supervised affair. Ivy would stand in the bathroom doorway, arms crossed, timing her. "You have 5 minutes," she'd say, her voice sharp. There was never any soap for Josephine, only a thin, worn-out washcloth and cold water. The small pleasures of a warm bath, of fragrant soap and soft lotion, were things of the past, memories from a life that felt a million miles away. The food became another instrument of torture. Ivy would cook elaborate, delicious-smelling meals for herself. Roasted chicken, savory stews, fresh salads. The aroma would fill the small house, a constant, taunting reminder of what they were denied. While Ivy ate at the dining table, Josephine and Zoe would be given a small bowl of watery broth, or a single dry piece of toast. Sometimes, as an act of supreme cruelty, Ivy would make Zoe's favorite meal, macaroni and cheese, and eat the entire dish in front of her, describing how creamy and delicious it was, while Zoe was forced to eat a plate of limp, boiled vegetables. Zoe began to lose weight. The natural, vibrant energy of a 6-year-old was draining away, replaced by a listlessness and a permanent sadness in her eyes. Her skin grew pale, and her clothes began to hang loosely on her small frame. Josephine watched this happening, with a growing sense of panic that clawed at her insides. Her own suffering was one thing. She was old. She had lived her life. But to watch her granddaughter, her precious Zoe, being slowly starved and broken, was a torment beyond anything she had ever endured. It was worse than the fire. The fire had been a swift, terrible tragedy. This was a slow, deliberate execution of the spirit. Josephine tried to fight back in small, desperate ways. She would try to hide a piece of bread from her own meager portion to give to Zoe later. But Ivy had eyes everywhere. She would discover the hidden food, and her punishment would be swift. No food at all for the next 2 meals. "Thieves don't get to eat," Ivy would say, her voice cold and final. The house, once a sanctuary of love and happy memories, became a place of fear and whispers. Josephine and Zoe learned to communicate with their eyes, sharing glances of sorrow, of fear, and of a desperate, unspoken love. They were prisoners in every sense of the word, and their warden was a master of psychological warfare. She knew just how to inflict the most pain without leaving a visible bruise. She was destroying them from the inside out. One afternoon, a woman from Josephine's church, Patricia, stopped by. Patricia was a kind, bustling woman who had known Josephine for years. She was worried because no one had seen Josephine in weeks, and she wasn't answering her phone. Patricia knocked firmly on the door. Ivy answered, her face a mask of concern. "Patricia, hello," Ivy said, stepping outside and closing the door behind her, physically blocking the entrance. "I'm so glad you came. I've been meaning to call the church." "Is Josephine all right?" Patricia asked, her brow furrowed with worry. "We've all been so concerned." Ivy let out a long, theatrical sigh. "It's been so difficult," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Her mind, it's starting to go. She has good days and bad days. Today is a bad day. She gets so confused and agitated. She doesn't recognize people. The doctor said it's best to keep her environment as quiet and routine as possible. No visitors. It just upsets her more. Ivy looked up at Patricia, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She thinks I'm holding her captive. She says terrible things. It's the illness talking, of course, but it's so hard. Patricia's face softened with pity. Dementia. It was a terrible, cruel disease. It explained everything. The missed calls, the absence from church. It all made a terrible kind of sense. "Oh, you poor thing," Patricia said, reaching out to touch Ivy's arm. "To be dealing with that all on your own. You are a saint for taking care of her like this. An absolute saint." "I do it because I love her," Ivy said, her voice thick with false humility. "And I love Kenneth. This is my family. I have to be strong for them." From inside the house, Josephine had crept to the window by the door. She could hear their voices, but not the words. She saw Patricia's look of pity. She saw her pat Ivy's arm in a gesture of comfort. She watched as Patricia walked away, shaking her head sadly, and Josephine understood. Ivy wasn't just imprisoning them. She was building a narrative for the outside world, a carefully constructed lie that painted her as a long-suffering saint, and Josephine as a confused, delusional old woman. She was not only caging their bodies, she was assassinating their character, ensuring that if they ever did manage to cry for help, no one would believe them. The isolation was now complete. They were utterly alone, trapped in a reality no one else could see. The days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of hunger, humiliation, and fear. The only thing that punctuated the bleakness was the ringing of the phone, the periodic calls from Kenneth. Each call was a fresh wave of torture. They would be brought before Ivy, threatened into silence, and forced to perform their part in the cruel charade. "How's my favorite girl?" Kenneth would ask Zoe, his voice a cheerful echo from a world that no longer seemed real. And Zoe, with Ivy's cold eyes boring into her, would whisper, "I'm fine, Daddy. I miss you." Her voice was small and fragile, a pale imitation of her usual bubbly self. "You sound a little down, sweetie," Kenneth would say, a hint of concern in his voice. "Is everything okay?" Before Zoe could answer, Ivy would take the phone. "She's just missing her daddy, that's all," Ivy would say with a light laugh. "We both are. It's hard when you're gone. But don't you worry, we're taking good care of each other." Kenneth, thousands of miles away, heard the words and was reassured. He was a soldier, trained to analyze threats, but his heart was not a battlefield. It was a place of love and trust, and he trusted his wife completely. He interpreted Zoe's sadness as a sign of her love for him. He interpreted his mother's quietness as the natural fatigue of old age. He couldn't conceive of the truth, because the truth was a horror beyond his imagination. The red flags were there, The quiet voices, the strange answers, the lack of detail, but he explained them away, filtering everything through his unwavering belief in the woman he loved. He was a good man, a trusting man, and his trust was the very weapon Ivy was using to destroy his family. One evening, after a particularly grueling day where Ivy had forced Josephine to scrub the kitchen floor on her hands and knees, Josephine lay in her bed, her old bones aching with a pain that was more than just physical. Zoe crept into the room and climbed into bed with her, snuggling close under the thin blanket. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just held on to each other in the darkness. Two shipwreck survivors on a tiny raft in the middle of a vast, cruel ocean. "Grandma," Zoe finally whispered, her voice trembling, "does Daddy still love us?" The question was like a knife in Josephine's heart. She pulled her granddaughter closer, her own tears finally beginning to fall, silent and hot on her cheeks. "Of course he does, my sweet girl," she whispered back, her voice cracking. "He loves us more than anything in the world." "Then why doesn't he save us?" Zoe asked, her voice filled with the heartbreaking innocence of a child who could not comprehend such betrayal. And Josephine had no answer. She could only hold her granddaughter tighter and pray for a miracle, for a dawn that seemed like it would never come. She realized with a sickening finality that their only hope and their greatest obstacle were the same person, Kenneth. Their savior was the man who had unknowingly delivered them to their tormentor, and he was the only one who had the power to set them free. But he was far away, blinded by love, and they were trapped in a fortress of lies with no way to send a message. The fallout from Ivy's silent, vicious war was not a crater in the ground, but a slow, creeping poison that was killing them one day at a time. Months crawled by, each day a mirror of the last. The oppressive atmosphere in the house had become their new normal, the constant gnawing hunger, the cold silence, the ever-present watchfulness of Ivy. It was the air they breathed, the world they inhabited. Hope had dwindled to a tiny ember-like flicker in the deepest corners of their hearts. They had stopped looking for a rescue that never came. They now focused only on survival, on getting through each hour, each minute, by leaning on the silent, unbreakable bond between them. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It started like all the others. The phone rang in Ivy's room. She answered with her customary sweetness. A few minutes later, she appeared in the living room doorway, holding the phone out like a scepter. By now, the ritual was well rehearsed. Josephine and Zoe steeled themselves, preparing to deliver the lines they had been forced to memorize. "He wants to talk to you," Ivy said, handing the phone to Josephine. Her eyes delivered the usual silent threat, but this time, there was something different in her demeanor, a subtle impatience, a distracted air. She seemed preoccupied. Josephine took the phone. "Hello, Kenneth." "Mom, how are you feeling?" His voice was a welcome balm, but it also brought a fresh wave of pain. It was the voice of the man who was supposed to protect them, yet he remained oblivious. I'm all right, son," Josephine said, her voice a near whisper. She felt a profound weariness settle over her, a fatigue that went bone deep. She had been without a proper bath for 3 days, and she felt a deep sense of shame that her son was speaking to her while she was in this state. "You don't sound all right, Mom. You sound tired. Is everything okay?" There was a new edge to his concern, a sharper focus. Maybe it was the connection, maybe it was a father's intuition, but for the first time, a genuine crack appeared in his wall of denial. We miss you, that's all," Josephine murmured, sticking to the script. "Let me talk to Zoe," he said. Josephine handed the phone to her granddaughter. Zoe took it, her small hand trembling. "Hi, Daddy." "Hey, my little warrior. How are you doing in school? Are you being good for Grandma?" Zoe looked at Josephine, her eyes wide with a silent plea. She looked at Ivy, who was now tapping her foot impatiently, her focus on something across the room. "Yes, Daddy," she whispered. "You sound sad, sweetie," Kenneth pressed. "You can tell me if something's wrong. You know that, right?" For a fleeting second, Zoe considered screaming the truth into the phone. "She's starving us, Daddy. She's hurting Grandma. Please come home." But fear, cold and sharp, silenced her. Ivy's threats echoed in her mind. "He'll think you're lying. He'll believe me. And I will make you pay." She couldn't do it. The risk was too great. With a heart that felt like it was breaking in two, she replied, "I'm okay, Daddy. I just miss you a lot." Kenneth sighed on the other end of the line, a sound of frustration and worry. He wasn't convinced. Something was wrong. The voices of the two people he loved most in the world were hollow, fragile things. They sounded like ghosts. "Okay, sweetie, let me talk to Ivy again." Zoe handed the phone back to Ivy. As Ivy took it, she shot them a look of pure annoyance, as if their sorrowful tones had created an inconvenience for her. "Honey, they sound really down," Kenneth said to her, his voice laced with anxiety. "Are you sure everything is okay over there?" "Of course, everything's fine," Ivy said, her voice a perfect blend of reassurance and loving exasperation. "Honestly, Kenneth, I think you're forgetting how much they miss you when you're gone. It's hard on them. And Josephine is getting older, you know. She has her down days. They're fine. They just need you home." Then she pivoted, expertly changing the subject, redirecting his emotional energy. "Speaking of which, honey, the property tax bill came, and it's a little higher than we expected. I was wondering if you could send a little extra this month to cover it. I don't want to have to worry about it." Just like that, his focus was shifted. He was a provider, a protector. A financial problem was a concrete issue he could solve from a distance. He agreed immediately, his mind now occupied with numbers and bank transfers. The vague, unsettling feeling about his mother and daughter was pushed to the background, overshadowed by a practical concern his wife had so cleverly presented. The conversation ended a few minutes later. Ivy hung up the phone, a look of satisfaction on her face. She had gotten what she wanted, but that small window, that brief moment of distraction while Ivy was on the phone, was all Josephine and Zoe needed. The instant Ivy had turned her back to focus on her conversation with Kenneth, a silent, desperate plan was communicated between grandmother and granddaughter with a single glance. They slipped away, moving as quietly as mice, down the hall to the bathroom. It was a mad dash for a moment of human dignity. They hadn't bathed in 3 days. They felt a deep primal need to be clean. They didn't dare run the water, as the sound would give them away. Working together in the dim light, they used cold water from the tap and the one thin washcloth they shared, hastily washing their faces, necks, and arms. It was a hurried, inadequate cleansing, but it felt like a resurrection. Then Josephine remembered something. Hidden away in the back of her closet, tucked inside an old shoebox, was a small, unopened bottle of lavender-scented body lotion. It was a gift from Kenneth from his last Christmas home. Ivy had never found it. While Zoe kept watch at the door, her heart hammering against her ribs, Josephine retrieved the precious bottle. Back in the bathroom, she poured a small amount into her palm. The scent of lavender filled the small space, a fragrance from another lifetime, a time of love and simple comforts. They took turns, gently rubbing the lotion onto each other's arms and legs. For Zoe, the lotion was a luxury beyond imagining. For Josephine, it was an act of defiance. But as she smoothed the cream over her granddaughter's dry, chapped skin, she saw the true extent of the damage. Zoe's arms were so thin, her skin so pale and flaky from malnutrition. She looked fragile, like a little bird that had fallen from its nest. And that's when Josephine's legendary strength finally broke. A tear escaped her eye, then another, and soon, a silent stream was rolling down her weathered cheeks. She wasn't crying for herself. She was crying for the stolen innocence of this beautiful child, for the happy, carefree girl who was fading away before her very eyes. Seeing her grandmother's tears, Zoe's own composure crumbled. The fear and sadness she kept bottled up inside came rushing out in a choked sob. "Grandma, what's wrong?" she wept. "Shh, my sweet girl, shh," Josephine whispered, pulling her into a fierce hug, though her own body was shaking. "It's going to be all right. Don't you cry. It will all be fine. Your father will come home. He's our only hope." It was at that exact moment that the bathroom door swung open. Ivy stood there, her face a thundercloud of absolute fury. Her eyes darted from their damp skin to the open bottle of lotion, and the air crackled with her rage. She had been betrayed. They had defied her. They had stolen a moment of comfort for themselves. To her, this was not an act of desperation. It was an act of rebellion. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her voice low and menacing. Before they could answer, she lunged forward. The first slap caught Josephine across the cheek, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small bathroom. The force of it sent the old woman stumbling back against the wall. Zoe screamed, a high-pitched cry of terror, and Ivy turned on her, her hand striking the child's face with the same brutal force. Slap, slap, slap. Again and again, she struck them, her rage untethered, her eyes wild. The scent of lavender was now mixed with the metallic smell of fear. "You think you can defy me in my house?" she screamed, her voice raw. "You think you can go behind my back? I will teach you a lesson you will never forget." She grabbed the lotion bottle and threw it against the wall, where it shattered, spattering the last of its precious contents across the tiles. "No food!" she shrieked, her face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. "For 3 days, nothing but water. Do you hear me? You will have water 3 times a day and nothing else. And this bathroom is locked." She dragged them from the room, their sobs filling the hallway, and slammed the bathroom door shut, turning the key in the lock with a loud final click. She did the same to the kitchen door. She had locked away their food, their water, their sanitation. She had stripped them of their last vestiges of humanity. But in her rage, Ivy had made a fatal error. The secret, the terrible central pillar of her power, was built on a lie Kenneth had confessed to her in a drunken stupor. It was the lie that Josephine had tried to stop their wedding. It was the foundation of her hatred, the justification for her cruelty. And in that moment, blinded by her fury, she finally revealed it. As she stood over the weeping mother and child, she pointed a trembling finger at Josephine. "This is all your fault, you old witch," she spat. "My husband told me what you did. He told me you never wanted him to marry me. You tried to stop us. Well, look who's in charge now. You wanted him to wait to get to know me? Well, now you're getting to know me. How do you like me now?" Josephine looked up, her cheek stinging, her heart pounding. But through her tears, she saw something with blinding clarity. The lie. The insane, nonsensical story Ivy had told her weeks ago. Ivy still believed it. This entire nightmare, this campaign of terror, was not born from a simple desire for control. It was born from a single toxic lie. A lie so powerful it had turned a beautiful woman into a monster. A lie that Kenneth, her own son, had somehow, impossibly planted in her mind. The pain of the slap faded, replaced by a horrifying, devastating revelation. Her son hadn't just failed to save them. He had, in some way she couldn't yet understand, given their tormentor the very weapon she was using to destroy them. Do you believe any lie, no matter how painful, could ever justify this kind of cruelty? Let me know with a simple yes or no in the comments below. The 3 days that followed the slap were a descent into a new level of hell. The kitchen and bathroom doors remained locked, stark wooden monuments to Ivy's authority. Their world shrank to the living room and their bedrooms, a prison within a prison. The first day was defined by a gnawing, aching hunger. Zoe, too weak and frightened to cry, lay curled up on the sofa, her small body trembling periodically. Josephine sat beside her, stroking her hair, whispering stories of brave knights and magical kingdoms, trying to fill the emptiness in her granddaughter's belly with words of love. All the while, Ivy moved through the house like a queen in her castle. She would open the refrigerator, the sound of the door seeming unnaturally loud in the silent house, and take out a bottle of juice. She would pour it into a tall glass, the liquid glugging, and drink it slowly, deliberately, right in front of them, her eyes never leaving theirs. It was a performance of power, a demonstration of everything they had lost. By the second day, the hunger had turned into a dull, constant ache, a hollow feeling that seemed to consume them from the inside. Thirst became their primary tormentor. 3 times a day, as promised, Ivy would unlock the kitchen door, fill 2 small glasses with tap water, and present them with a flourish, as if she were bestowing a great mercy. They would drink it greedily, the cool liquid a momentary relief that only seemed to highlight their starvation. Their bodies grew weak. Walking from the living room to the bedroom became an exhausting journey. Josephine could feel her own strength failing, her old bones protesting with every small movement, but her focus was solely on Zoe. She watched as the light in her granddaughter's eyes grew dimmer, her skin more sallow. She was wilting, a beautiful flower being denied the sun and water it needed to live. On the 3rd day, a strange sense of detachment set in. The hunger was still there, but it was a distant, foggy sensation. Their world had become fuzzy at the edges. Josephine felt a terrifying thought surface in her mind. This is how it ends. We are going to die in this house, and no one will ever know why. She pushed the thought away, forcing herself to focus. She had to be strong for Zoe. She had to survive. On the morning of the fourth day, Ivy unlocked the doors. She didn't bring food. She brought a new task, a new form of cruelty. She led them out into the backyard, into the blinding glare of the morning sun. The grass was overgrown, thick with weeds. Ivy pointed to a rusty machete and a small curved sickle lying on the ground. "The yard is a mess," she announced, her voice bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to their grim reality. "It needs to be cleaned up. You two are going to cut the grass." Josephine stared at her in disbelief. "Ivy, please," she begged, her voice hoarse from lack of use. "We haven't eaten in 3 days. We have no strength. I am an old woman. She is just a child." "Then you'd better get to work, hadn't you?" Ivy said with a cold smile. "Maybe if you do a good job, I'll consider giving you some lunch." She turned and went back inside, leaving them under the hot, unforgiving sun, forcing her aching body to move. Josephine picked up the sickle. She handed it to Zoe, showing her how to hold it, though the very idea of her granddaughter wielding such a tool sent a shiver of fear through her. She took the machete herself, its weight feeling immense in her weakened state. They began to work. It was a slow, agonizing process. The sun beat down on them, and within minutes they were both drenched in sweat. Every swing of the machete sent a jolt of pain up Josephine's arm and into her back. Zoe, smaller and weaker, could only manage to saw at the thickest weeds, her small face grim with determination. They worked for what felt like an eternity, but when Josephine looked back, she saw they had cleared only a tiny patch of the yard. Their movements became slower, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Zoe stumbled, her knees buckling from exhaustion, and sat down hard on the ground, the sickle falling from her grasp. She looked up at her grandmother, her eyes filled with tears of frustration and despair. "I can't, Grandma," she whispered. "I'm so tired." At that moment, the back door opened and Ivy stepped out onto the porch, a tall glass of iced tea in her hand. She surveyed their pathetic progress, her lip curling in disdain. "Is that all you've done?" she scoffed. "I've seen snails move faster. You're not trying hard enough. Get up," she barked at Zoe. "Get back to work, you lazy little thing." And in that instant, something inside Josephine finally, irrevocably, snapped. It was not a conscious decision. It was a primal seismic shift deep in her soul. For months she had endured. She had been starved, humiliated, and stripped of her dignity. And she had borne it all with a stoic resignation, all for the sake of protecting her granddaughter. But seeing Ivy stand there, healthy and strong, berating this exhausted, starving child, the last precious piece of her family, the fear that had governed her for so long was incinerated in a sudden, white-hot flash of pure, protective rage. The love she had for Zoe, a love that was gentle and nurturing, transformed into something fierce and dangerous. It became a weapon. Josephine dropped the machete. She straightened her back, and though her body was frail, her spirit suddenly felt as strong as steel. She walked over and stood between Ivy and Zoe, shielding her granddaughter with her own body. She looked Ivy directly in the eye. The woman who had been a whimpering victim just moments before was gone. In her place was a matriarch, a survivor, a lioness defending her cub. "No," Josephine said. Her voice was not loud, but it was filled with a cold, absolute authority that made Ivy take an involuntary step back. "No more. This is over. You will not speak to her like that again. You will not touch her again. You will not harm her in any way, ever again." Ivy was momentarily stunned by this sudden defiance. Then, a slow, ugly smile spread across her face. "Or what?" she sneered. "What are you going to do about it, you pathetic old woman?" Josephine took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "This ends today," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more menace than any shout. "I survived a fire that took my husband and my children. I raised my son alone. I will not let a monster like you destroy what I have left. The abuse stops now. Or I swear on the graves of my family, I will kill you myself." The threat hung in the hot, still air, shocking and absolute. For the first time, Ivy saw something in Josephine's eyes that wasn't fear. It was a promise. She was so taken aback by this raw, unexpected courage that she was momentarily speechless. Her control had been challenged, her power questioned. Her carefully constructed world of tyranny was cracking at the foundations. Her shock quickly curdled into a deeper, more venomous rage than ever before. This rebellion could not be allowed to stand. She had to crush it, completely and utterly. Without another word, Ivy spun around and stormed back into the house. Josephine and Zoe stood frozen in the yard, watching her go. A moment later, Ivy reappeared, a large bucket in her hands. It was the bucket she kept by the back door, the one she used to wash her dog and her cat after they came in from the yard. It was filled with cold, murky water, scum floating on the surface. It was water that contained days of dirt, grime, and the animals' own filth, their urine and their feces. It was the ultimate instrument of humiliation. She marched directly toward them, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You want to challenge me?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You want to know what I'm going to do about it? I'm going to remind you what you are. You are nothing. You are filth." And with a final guttural scream of rage, she heaved the bucket forward, unleashing the torrent of disgusting, foul-smelling water. It crashed over Josephine and Zoe, a shocking, icy wave of degradation. They were drenched in an instant, the cold, dirty liquid soaking their clothes, plastering their hair to their skin, the stench of animal waste filling their nostrils. They collapsed to the ground under the force of it, sputtering and shivering, utterly debased. Ivy stood over them, panting, the empty bucket clattering to the ground beside her. A look of triumphant cruelty was on her face. She had won. She had broken them. But she was wrong. They were not the only ones there. Standing in the shadows of the open kitchen doorway, unseen and unheard, was a figure, a man in a military uniform. He had come home early, a surprise for his family. He had walked into his mother's house, calling their names, but got no answer. He heard voices in the backyard and went to surprise them. He had stopped in the doorway, confused by the scene before him. He had watched as his wife screamed at his mother. He had heard his mother's shocking, desperate threat. And he had stood there, paralyzed in utter disbelief, as the woman he loved, the woman he trusted with his entire world, hoisted a bucket of putrid, filthy water and poured it over his own mother and his own child. He did not move. He did not speak. He only watched, his mind struggling to process the absolute horror of what he was seeing. The beautiful, loving wife he had left on the porch months ago was gone. In her place was a monster, drenched in the sunlight, casting a long, dark shadow over the two people she was supposed to protect. Kenneth was home, and he had seen everything. For a long, stretched-out moment, the only sound in the backyard was the slow, dripping of filthy water from Josephine's clothes onto the parched grass. The stench of the foul water hung heavy in the air, a sickening perfume of decay and humiliation. Ivy stood panting, the empty bucket at her feet, a look of twisted victory on her face. Josephine and Zoe were on the ground, shivering, a tangled heap of misery and shock. They were so consumed by their own degradation that they didn't see him. But Ivy did. Her triumphant gaze lifted from her victims and drifted toward the house. And then she saw him. Kenneth stood in the doorway, a ghost in a soldier's uniform. He was as still as a statue, his face completely drained of color. His mind, trained to react to threats in a split second, had simply shut down. It could not compute the scene before him. The image of his beautiful wife, his loving Ivy, pouring a bucket of waste over his elderly mother and his small child, was so monstrous, so fundamentally impossible, that his brain refused to accept it. It was like looking at the sun and being told it was the moon. Everything he knew, everything he believed to be true, had just been vaporized in an instant. The triumphant smirk on Ivy's face collapsed. It was as if her bones had suddenly turned to water. Her eyes widened, not in fear at first, but in pure, unadulterated panic. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing the frantic, cornered creature beneath. Her plan, her control, her entire manufactured reality, all of it was gone. Kenneth finally moved. He took one step out of the doorway, then another. He didn't run. He walked slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked on Ivy. He didn't look at his mother or his daughter yet. He couldn't. His entire focus was on the woman who had betrayed him in the most profound way imaginable. "What?" he said, and his voice was not a shout. It was something far more terrifying. It was a low, guttural sound, barely human, a rumble of pure, condensed rage that seemed to shake the very air around them. "What did you just do?" Ivy opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked from Kenneth's face, which was becoming a terrifying mask of fury, to the two weeping figures on the ground. For a second, he saw the frantic calculation in her eyes. She was searching for a lie, for an explanation, for some way to twist this reality into something she could survive, but there was no lie big enough to cover this. There was no story that could explain away the sight of his mother and daughter soaking in filth, and then she did the only thing a coward can do when the truth comes for them. She ran. She didn't run towards the house, past him. She spun around and bolted toward the back fence, scrambling over it with a desperate, animalistic agility. She dropped to the other side and just kept running, disappearing into the neighbor's yard, a fleeting shadow of the woman he thought he knew. She didn't look back. The moment she was gone, it was as if a spell had been broken. The rage in Kenneth's eyes was instantly replaced by a wave of anguish and horror. He finally looked down at his family. They were still on the ground, Zoe now sobbing uncontrollably, her small body shaking violently. Josephine was holding her, trying to shield her, whispering words of comfort even as tears streamed down her own face. "Oh my God!" Kenneth breathed, the words catching in his throat. He rushed forward and fell to his knees beside them, heedless of the foul water that soaked into his uniform. "Mom, Zoe, I'm here. I'm home." He reached out, his hands trembling, and gently helped his mother sit up. She flinched at his touch, a reaction so ingrained by months of abuse that it was now instinct. The sight of that flinch sent a fresh spike of pain through Kenneth's heart. He pulled Zoe into his arms, and she clung to him with a desperate strength, burying her wet, dirty face into his chest, her small sobs echoing the sound of his own breaking heart. He held them both, right there in the ruined yard, for how long he didn't know. He was a soldier, a protector, the man who was supposed to keep them safe from all the dangers of the world. And he had failed. He had left them in the hands of the greatest danger they had ever known. Finally, he found his strength. "Come on," he said, his voice thick and raw. "Let's get you inside. Let's get you clean." He helped his mother to her feet, her old body so light and fragile he was afraid she might break. He carried Zoe in his other arm. He led them into the house, their house, which now felt like a crime scene. He took them straight to the bathroom. He turned on the shower, and the steam that filled the room felt like the first clean breath they had taken in months. He found the softest towels, the gentlest soap. He helped his mother wash the filth from her hair. He gently washed his daughter's face, his own tears mixing with the water as he saw the red mark of a handprint, faint but still visible, on her pale cheek. Once they were clean, wrapped in warm, fluffy robes from his own closet, he sat them down on the living room sofa. He made them tea with honey, his hands shaking so much he could barely hold the kettle. He sat on the coffee table in front of them, and he looked into their eyes. "Tell me," he said, his voice breaking. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." And so the story came pouring out. It didn't come in a straight line, but in a flood of painful, fragmented memories. Josephine started, her voice weak but steady, describing the day he left, the moment Ivy's demeanor changed. She spoke of the isolation, of the visitors being turned away, of the phone being taken. Zoe, nestled safely against her father's side, would chime in with the heartbreakingly simple details that only a child would remember. "She threw Susan's lemon cake in the trash, Daddy," Zoe whispered. "She said it had germs." Josephine continued, her voice gaining a pained strength as she recounted the verbal abuse, the starvation, the constant humiliation. She told him about the denial of baths, about the cold, cruel way Ivy would stand over them while they were finally allowed to wash without soap. "She ate my macaroni and cheese right in front of me," Zoe added, her voice trembling. "She said I was too skinny to deserve it." Kenneth listened, and with every word, a piece of his heart turned to stone. He felt a rage building inside him so immense, so powerful, that it terrified him, but he pushed it down. He had to hear it all. He had to understand the full depth of his failure. Finally, Josephine reached the part that made the least sense to her. She kept saying it was my fault, she said, her brow furrowed in a confusion that had tormented her for months. She said you told her something, on your honeymoon. She said you told her that I tried to stop our wedding, that I didn't think she was good enough for you. Kenneth stared at his mother. The world tilted on its axis. The rage in his chest was suddenly doused by an icy wave of absolute horror. The memory, buried under months of duty and distance, came rushing back with sickening clarity. The champagne, the hotel room, his drunken, stupid, rambling confession about a lie he had never even told. A foolish, childish thought he had dismissed in an instant. "Oh my God," he whispered, the blood draining from his face. He put his head in his hands. "No, Mom, no." He looked up, his eyes filled with a guilt so profound it was like a physical weight. "Mom," he said, his voice choked with shame. I did say that, but it wasn't true. It was a stupid drunken joke, a lie I made up in my own head. I never imagined." He couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't say the words. "I never imagined she would use my foolishness as a reason to torture my family." He had handed her the knife. He had given her the motive. He was not just an absent protector. He was the accidental architect of their suffering. The look on his mother's face was not one of accusation. It was one of deep, sorrowful understanding. She finally understood the source of the hatred, and he finally understood the true depth of Ivy's wickedness. A normal person would have been confused or asked for clarification. A normal person would have let it go. But Ivy had nurtured that lie. She had watered it with her own poison and let it grow into a monstrous tree that had blotted out the sun in their lives. At that moment, Kenneth's grief and guilt coalesced into a single, cold point of resolve. There would be no more tears. There would be time for that later. Now, it was time for action. "Get dressed," he said, his voice now calm, steady, and full of command. "We're leaving. We're going to the hospital." He took them to the emergency room. The doctors were kind, gentle, but their findings were a brutal clinical confirmation of the horror story he had just heard. Malnutrition, severe dehydration, multiple skin infections from lack of hygiene. And for Zoe, the doctor noted clear signs of prolonged emotional trauma and neglect. Every word from the doctor's mouth was another nail in Ivy's coffin, and another stab of guilt in Kenneth's own heart. From the hospital, he drove straight to the police station. His mother and daughter, now medically cleared but emotionally shattered, waited in the car. He walked into the station, his uniform still stained from the foul water, and he told the officer at the desk that he needed to report a crime. He spoke with a cold, precise fury, detailing every single act of cruelty, every starvation, every slap, every humiliation. He was a soldier giving an after-action report. His mission now singular and clear: justice. Late that night, he took them not to his mother's house, but to his own, the house he had bought for his new life with Ivy. He helped his mother into the master bedroom, and he tucked his daughter into the guest bed, sitting with her until her exhausted, tear-filled eyes finally drifted shut. He stood in the hallway of the silent house, a house that was supposed to be a home, a place of love and laughter. It now felt tainted, haunted by the ghost of the woman he thought he had married. The war he had trained for his whole life was supposed to be fought on a battlefield with clear enemies. But he had been fighting the wrong war, in the wrong place, all along. The real war had been here, in the quiet rooms of his own family's home. And as he stood there in the darkness, he made a silent vow. The war against Ivy had just begun, and this was a war he would not lose. The search for Ivy was not long. For 72 hours, she was a ghost, a phantom who had vanished from the face of the earth. Kenneth spent those 3 days in a state of suspended animation. He moved, he spoke, he took care of his mother and daughter, but a part of him was frozen, trapped in the moment he saw that bucket tip. He had moved Josephine and Zoe into his and Ivy's home, a place he now scrubbed clean of her memory. He threw out her clothes, her perfumes, her books. He packed away every photograph, every reminder that she had ever existed in their lives. He was trying to erase a stain that he knew would never truly fade. He dedicated himself completely to his family's recovery. He cooked them simple, nourishing meals, and his heart broke a little every time he saw the cautious way Zoe ate, as if she expected the food to be snatched away. He sat with his mother for hours, listening as she finally, freely spoke of the fear and the loneliness she had endured. They didn't speak of Ivy by name. She was simply her, a dark presence they were now working to banish from their home and their minds. On the third day, the police called. They had found her. She hadn't run far. She was hiding out at the home of a distant cousin, trying to gather money to flee the state. When the police arrested her, she didn't fight. She didn't cry. Witnesses said she was cold, silent, and defiant, her beautiful face a mask of detached arrogance, even as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The monster had been caged. Kenneth filed for divorce immediately. He also pressed forward with the full force of the law. He hired the best lawyer he could find, not for revenge, but for a sense of cosmic justice. He felt it was his duty, his final act of protection for his family, to ensure that Ivy's actions had real, lasting consequences. The legal battle that followed was grueling. Ivy's defense team tried to paint her as a stressed, overwhelmed young wife, struggling to care for a difficult elderly woman and a troubled child. They tried to portray Josephine as senile and confused, and Zoe as a manipulative child who was being coached by her grandmother. But the evidence was overwhelming. The doctor's reports detailed the physical toll of the abuse, the malnutrition, the infections. Neighbors like Susan and Patricia came forward, their testimonies now viewed in a horrifying new light. They spoke of how Ivy had skillfully isolated Josephine, how she had lied with such convincing sweetness about Josephine's supposed dementia. Their stories dismantled the image of the caring wife and revealed the calculating manipulator beneath. The most powerful testimony came from Josephine herself. She sat on the witness stand, a small, frail woman in a simple dress. But when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. She did not speak with anger or a desire for vengeance. She simply told the truth. She described the daily humiliations, the hunger, the fear. She recounted the story of the filthy water with a quiet dignity that filled the courtroom with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. When she was done, there was not a single person in that room who doubted her word. The final verdict was delivered on a cold winter morning. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, looked at Ivy with an expression of undisguised contempt. She sentenced Ivy to 5 years in prison for multiple counts of abuse and unlawful imprisonment. She was also ordered to pay a fine of $250,000 in damages and to complete 2 years of community service upon her release, working specifically with elder abuse charities. It was a harsh sentence, but in the eyes of the court, it was a just one. As Ivy was led away in handcuffs, she looked over at Kenneth one last time. There was no remorse in her eyes. There was only a cold, reptilian hatred. It was the last he would ever see of her. The day the divorce was finalized, Kenneth felt a profound sense of release. He walked out of the courthouse and took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. It was over. That chapter of his life was closed. That same week, he submitted his letter of resignation to the military. His war was over. He had served his country with honor, but he now knew where his true duty lay. It was not on some foreign battlefield. It was here, at home. His family needed him. He would not fail them again. They sold his mother's house, the place that held so many memories, both beautiful and horrific. They moved permanently into Kenneth's home, and together, the three of them began the slow, difficult process of healing. It was not easy. The scars were deep, not just on their bodies, but on their souls. Zoe had nightmares for months, waking up screaming in the night, and Kenneth would be there to hold her, to whisper to her that she was safe, that the monster was gone and would never come back. Josephine, though physically recovering, had a new sadness in her eyes, a shadow of the betrayal she had suffered. But slowly, day by day, love began to work its quiet magic. Kenneth filled their lives with new, happy memories. They took trips to the beach, Zoe's laughter finally returning as she splashed in the waves. They planted a new garden in the backyard, replacing the overgrown weeds with bright, colorful flowers. They cooked together, the kitchen once again a place of warmth and delicious smells. Kenneth learned to bake lemon cake, and every Tuesday without fail, he would bring a slice to his mother, a small ritual to reclaim a piece of what they had lost. They were a family forged in fire, tested by unimaginable cruelty, and they had not only survived, they had endured. Their bond, which had always been strong, was now unbreakable. They had seen the worst of human nature, but they had responded not with hatred, but with a renewed commitment to love and kindness. They were three survivors, standing together, their faces turned toward the sun, forever grateful for the simple, beautiful gift of being safe, being together, and being home. What would you have done if you were in Kenneth's shoes, facing a manipulator like Ivy? Let me know in the comments. This story is a powerful reminder that evil can wear a beautiful face, and that the deepest wounds often come from the people we trust the most. And if you think this story of betrayal was shocking, wait until you see the next story. The lies are bigger, and the stakes are even higher. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in honesty and compassion. Every subscription is a stand against the kind of darkness we saw in this story. Only people who support lies and manipulation would refuse to join us in standing for the truth. I'll see you in the next story. Always remember, at Virtuous Stories, we love you.